Okay, so we're talking about the colonization of the New World. And the word colonization essentially means starting a new society. So European explorers found out that there were gold and spices and riches and certain metals, different things that were across the Atlantic Ocean that they could capitalize on. And to capitalize basically means to make money off of. So it first started with England after the Spanish started exploring what is now America. They wanted to kind of cash in on some of these riches. So Queen Elizabeth, who was the queen or the monarch of England at the time, remember a monarchy is a country that's ruled by a royal family. So she wasn't voted in, she wasn't elected in like in our democracy. She assumed power because of her wealth and of her family. So she chose an explorer named Sir Walter Raleigh to lead the beginning of colonization in North America. And if those of you are familiar with the state of North Carolina, Raleigh is the capital named after Sir Walter Raleigh. So they set up this Roanoke colony. And Roanoke was an island just off the coast of what is present-day North Carolina. Again, that kind of gives an explanation for why Raleigh is one of the bigger cities in North Carolina, named after this guy. Problem was, it didn't last long, and it failed. They didn't plan very well. They didn't bring enough supplies. They weren't really prepared for the natives that were living there. They weren't prepared for some of the weather conditions because, again, it was on the other side of the ocean in a slightly different climate than England was. So again, if you look on this map here, here's present-day Virginia, present-day North Carolina. Roanoke is just off the northeast coast of North Carolina here, kind of by the Outer Banks. Now, that one failed. The second attempt that they had at making a colony was in Jamestown in what is present-day Virginia. So this group in England, known as the Virginia Company, obtained a charter, which is a legal document that gave rights to a specific person or group of people. So this Virginia Company got permission from the king, King James I, to start a colony in America. Now, he didn't just say, go and do what you want. He essentially said, I want a portion of whatever money that you make, and that will go towards me and the English government or the English crown. So this group settled in Jamestown, again, located in present-day Virginia, just north of the island of Roanoke. So they weren't really scared off by the fact that this first colony failed. Remember that men at that time, especially men of power, were very ego-driven and kind of thought, we can do it better. The people that tried to set up Roanoke, they weren't doing it right, so we're going to do this one better. Now, there were struggles for this new colony. There was starvation. So again, they didn't bring enough food, nor could they bring enough food because you had to make sure that you could get your vessel, your boat across that huge Atlantic Ocean. They weren't really prepared for the changes of the seasons. So they didn't really know how to farm. They didn't think ahead to plan and have a harvest that would be lasting throughout the winter. Because remember, you can't farm, you can't grow crops or maintain crops in a colder winter, which even Virginia, which is south of Michigan here, they still have colder winters. And so that was a problem. So starvation. There was also disease. There wasn't modern medicine that was able to take care of common things today like the cold and the common flu, things that might put us out for a day or two or a few days, but eventually we can get better because we can go to the store and we can pick up a prescription or we can get some over-the-counter medication that will help take care of it. There was also fighting among the colonists. So lack of organized government, lack of structure led to fighting, and in some cases it went to the death. So again, in relation, Roanoke was a little bit south of North Carolina. They went a little bit further north to what is now Jamestown. And it wasn't really by design. It was at that time kind of just taken where the winds blow you and where the ocean currents will take you, and landed in present-day Virginia. Now, seeing that this colony was failing and not wanting it to turn out like Roanoke, and seeing that some of the colonial workers were being lazy and complaining about not having enough food, having to do too much work, a guy named John Smith made a rule that if you don't work, you don't eat. So he said basically roll up your sleeves or starve and die. So if you were not pulling your weight, if you were not contributing, you were not going to get food. So imagine if that same thing applied to us today. Imagine if you weren't doing an assignment or if you weren't doing chores around the house and you were told you can't have lunch today, you can't have dinner today. Those were things that were going on that John Smith said we've got to fix. So once things got going and the colony started to thrive, colonists began growing tobacco. So now knowing that it was a law that they had to work, the work was being done, and they started to realize we can grow things more than just what we need to eat. There are certain things that are commodities, or in other words, in high demand, and natives kind of taught them about growing tobacco. And tobacco was a very social product. It was used for social engagements among native cultures, but also starting to become popular over in Europe. And so people were willing to spend good money and top dollar for these tobacco leaves that could then be ground up and used for social purposes. So it became a very valuable trade item as well as a social good. And so this was really the cash crop that got Jamestown up and running. And a cash crop is anything that you grow specifically to make money and not to survive on. So you do not need tobacco to survive. In fact, many of us know now that tobacco is more of a life hindrance than it is a necessity, but people are still willing to pay good money to obtain it. So we start to see a new government. And because learning from the failures of Roanoke and learning from the early failures and struggles in the Jamestown colony, colonists wanted to create a form of government that was different from the government in England. They wanted independence from England to be able to form this democratic republic form of government where elected officials would make rules and regulations for the colony. In other words, they thought the king or the queen doesn't always know what's right, especially when they're all the way across on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles away. It makes more sense to have a government run by locals and by your peers, people who understand you and understand what's going on. So basically, this type of government, this democratic republican form of government, which is one of our vocab terms, goes on the idea of popular sovereignty, which we talked about in our last unit, means power to the people. It's one of those democratic principles. It's also a core democratic value. And this is in contradiction with a single ruler or a dictator or a monarch who might run by his or her own wants and needs as opposed to what the majority wants. So in a democracy, you listen to what the majority of people want and you go with that because you want to make the mass of people happy. Whereas in an authoritarian government like a dictatorship or a monarchy like they had over in England, it was basically, if I'm in charge and I want this, it's going to happen. I don't care what the people think. And that usually creates dissension and eventually could lead to revolt or revolution. So this governing body in Jamestown was known as the House of Burgesses. So it was an elected group of officials very similar to our Congress today. So we elect members to serve in the 100 seats in our Senate and the 435 seats in our House of Representatives. So those 535 members collectively make up our Congress, but every one of them is voted on by the people. They don't just assume the position because they want to or because somebody else said, yeah, you can have it. They have to be elected in, and they have to be reelected if they want to keep their job. So the first truly successful colony, because remember, Jamestown had its struggles and there were some problems in the Jamestown colony. So the first truly successful colony happened in 1620 in Plymouth. Okay, so present day Massachusetts. And this was led by a group known as the Pilgrims. And I know that we think of Pilgrims, we think Thanksgiving, we think about maybe some of the commercial aspects of Pilgrims, but the definition of a pilgrim is somebody who leaves their home or leaves a location and moves for religious reasons. So if you're not happy with the government because maybe they are not allowing you to practice your religion, or if you want to move because another location will offer you maybe kind of like a commune or an organization, a community that practices the same religion, you would be known as a pilgrim if you were to move for those religious reasons. So this group at Plymouth was known as the Separatists. So this was a specific type of pilgrimage where they wanted to separate from the Church of England, because over in England they said, you can practice religion, but you have to do it our way. You have to follow the Church of England. If you think otherwise, if you don't believe in our God, if you don't follow our religious teachings, then there must be something wrong with you, and we fear for your soul. And these separatists said, no, we kind of think along the same lines, but we don't follow exactly your doctrine. We don't follow exactly your beliefs in your religion. We want to kind of branch off a little bit. And so the people in England said, fine, if you want to, you can do so, but you got to do it somewhere other than here. So the Pilgrims said, okay, we'll take this and we'll go to this new world where we can practice our religion freely. And our First Amendment right to freedom of expression, which includes freedom of religion, is really based on this group that started in Plymouth at the time. So self-government in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, they practiced self-government just like they did over in Jamestown, just south of them. And they did this by holding town meetings to determine public policy. And public policy basically means what we're going to do. What are our rules going to be? What are our laws? What are the expectations? How are people going to do things in our town, in our colony? So they elected a governor and representatives, but at the time, only men could serve, and really only wealthy, church-going white males could serve as representatives. So it wasn't really truly representing all people, all walks of life. It was really just representing wealthy, white, landowning, religious males. Now, these representatives were able to write their own laws, though Parliament still had some control. So Parliament, which was the government over in England, said, we'll allow you to self-govern yourselves as long as things are not going to make us upset and as long as you're not going to get yourselves in trouble. But there will be some things that we are going to step in at. Just like in a classroom, Mrs. Banks, Mrs. Comiskey will allow us teachers to make certain rules within our classroom, but if there's anything that goes on in a teacher's classroom that might go against their wishes, they have the power to step in and overrule. Okay, it's kind of that federalism model where you've got a group at the top that has a little bit more authority, and then underneath that are some subordinates, kind of like federal government and state governments. Many churches were also self-governed. So church activities were another form of self-government in Massachusetts. But this is the big idea that we want to leave you with, is that in both of these colonies, Jamestown in Virginia, Plymouth in Massachusetts, they wanted and practiced self-government. And as long as they could do that, they were happy. But we're going to learn shortly that the powers that be over in England were going to take that right away from them. And that did not make them happy. Okay, so that comes in 1622 after a Native American uprising. So in other words, after Native Americans were attacking these colonists and creating problems, King James I said, clearly, you can't govern yourselves. Clearly, you can't be trusted over there because I'm having to, answer to these fights that are going on. I'm having to protect you and send money that I don't want to spend. So if you can't take care of yourselves, we're going to be in charge of you. And so King James I took away their right to self-govern, and that made many of these colonists unhappy and start to think, well, maybe we should just be independent. Maybe we don't need England to be in charge of us and watch over us. Right. Now, two influential documents that came up. One was the Mayflower Compact, which was signed over in Plymouth, and it was a set of rules and regulations that were very similar to our current U.S. Constitution. In fact, when the framers or the writers of our current Constitution were organizing and developing this, they looked at things like the Mayflower Compact to help them out. So this was really the first constitution of our country. And that goes into another vocab word that we've talked about, social compact, this agreement between people and the government, which basically shows that governmental power would be limited. So there's only so much that the government can do. And the common people of the colonies would have the greatest power. And then another document that was influential was something called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which when the colony of Connecticut started after Plymouth, it essentially expanded this idea of representative government, which gave all white men the right to vote. Again, slaves, Native Americans, immigrants, and women were not given this right to vote. So still our country had a long way to go, even from this slight progress that they made at the beginning. And it also limited the governor's power. So at first, the colony of Plymouth struggled, but once they got help from Native Americans in the way of farming, hunting, and fishing, and that's why we celebrate Thanksgiving, it's basically a celebration of Native Americans kind of coming to the rescue, teaching and saving, what was looking to be doom for these Plymouth colonists in the early 17th century.